Hi everyone. In this video, I'd like to talk about almost everything you need to know when you come from a narcissistic family. So this will be a synopsis, a list of lots of the things that can have happened, patterns of thinking that you'd have developed. So lots of people think that's just me, that's just what I'm like, but actually there can be reactions to the background that we've come from. Some of them I'll speak a bit about, some of them I won't. Hopefully this video won't be too long. And also, pace yourself if you start to look these things up, so you don't get overwhelmed or feel stressed by it. So it's just a little video about what you need to know. So let's start. Parentification. So parentification is something that happens to many children of narcissists. So they get put into the parent role by the parent, and it's like the roles are reversed. There's a lack of boundaries, and the parent is treating the child like a confidant or a therapist, or the child is told things about their parent's relationship with the other parent which are inappropriate, or they're told about money worries and things like that. So they have worries on their shoulders that are not appropriate for a child to have. They often feel like they have to fix those things for that parent, or listen to the parent for hours as the parent talks about their problems and issues. And if they don't, then there's going to be a price to pay. And then also, it might be the only time that that child feels that they're of any value to that parent. So parentification is one thing that happens to children of narcissists. Triggers and triggering. So when we've come out of a narcissistic family, we're going to find ourselves very reactive to the world. So basically, things are happening, and then we're triggered into a defensive state by that. So it could be anger, it can be people pleasing, it can be shame or guilt, depending on the situation that we're in. And these are all survival mechanisms. I have a video on triggers and triggering, and I have a video as well on how CPTSD works and how we can look at it in the context of fight, flight, freeze, submit, and attach. So we have these triggered responses, and they're so ingrained in us that it feels like second nature and we don't even think about it. And we actually don't have control over our reactions to things when we're not aware of what's happening. So we can develop our self-awareness around our reactions to things and notice how they feel different. And that's how we can notice triggers and triggering. So triggers and our triggered states. So how do we feel? What does it feel like in terms of body sensations? What thoughts are in our mind? And what emotions can we feel? The window of tolerance. What's the window of tolerance? This is the space in which we feel mentally like we're coping with life, we're managing everything, our head feels clear, we can think clearly, we're problem solving. Then, of course, when we're triggered, this is then when we go into fight or flight. So we go up into hyperarousal, or freeze and submit, which is when we go down into hypoarousal. So these are two different aspects of our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So it can be good to understand biologically what's going on for us when these things are happening. So we're either in our window of tolerance or we're out of our window of tolerance. So this is something that comes from Dr. Dan Siegel. And I can put some links in the description to videos that he's done. So he's got some videos on YouTube and really useful information. And I mentioned the window of tolerance as well in a few of my other videos, which are all about CPTSD and triggers and whatnot. So the fact that we're often triggered is going to affect our relationships with people. So often we're going to have struggles with relationships. I have a video on that, and there's an article on that on my website as well. So we're often triggered. We're often in a place where we feel inferior to other people. We put our own needs last and other people's needs first. We might feel good when the outside world thinks we're good, and we're getting self-esteem and approval from the outside world. It doesn't come from inside of us. And because of those struggles with relationships as well, It's hard to have a deep, authentic relationship where we feel very relaxed with the other person. So, of course, this is different for everyone, but it's probably going to be an issue because of being triggered a lot, because of what we've come from, because we're not in touch with our own needs, because it's hard to feel equal in a relationship, and then also because of our attachment style. So our attachment style is developed in our first year of life. And then they found that when they followed children from the age of 1, when they first checked in with them and seen what relationship they have with their mother into their adult life, then it ends up being the same. So what's our attachment style? That's the way we relate to other people. That's how secure we feel with other people, and that's how secure we feel in getting our needs met. 60% of the general population have a secure attachment style. That means they're confident that they'll get their needs met and they feel secure around other people. And 40% of people don't. So 40% of people have an ambivalent or avoidant attachment style or a disorganized attachment style. So there are going to be issues here with if people feel they can get their needs met or not. And then many children of narcissists have a disorganized attachment style. So this means no reliable strategy to get needs met and feeling confused a lot of the time. All our adult figures have an influence on us. Some people have all narcissists around them, no positive role models, and then other people may have had 1 or 2 people, maybe more, in their early years that help to shape how they attach to other people. So it's going to be a different picture for everyone. So we're going to have struggles with relationships for lots of reasons, and then also because of our attachment style, and then issues with trusting people as well. So there's an article, and I think I've done a video as well about why we have issues in relationships, and I'll put links to all of these things in the description. And as part of those struggles in relationships and our attachment style, we're going to get trauma bonded to other people. And also we can get trauma bonded to addictions and objects as well. So we're often going to find ourselves in relationships that are dysfunctional when we've come from a background like this. And then we're going to be trauma bonded in that relationship. That means that even though we know it's unhealthy for us, we can't leave. So we might spend years stuck in a relationship that we feel like we want to not be in anymore, but we find it really difficult to leave. Why? There's lots of reasons for that. I've done a video on the trauma bond, and there's an article on my website as well. And most people know something about the trauma bond these days. So Stockholm syndrome, it's called as well, when we bond with our captors and then even come to take on their values and their ideas and their perception of us as well as a captive. So important to know about the trauma bond. Boundaries. So we're going to struggle with setting boundaries. Some people don't even know what boundary is. Boundaries are basically rules for how we expect to be treated and how we treat other people. So it's all linked in with our values, and it's linked in with our ability to stand up for ourselves and to know ourselves and what our wants and needs are. So children asserting their boundaries and becoming independent is punished in a narcissistic household in those early important years. And this is why people can get to adulthood and then not really even be aware that they're allowed to stand up for themselves. They're allowed to be angry, because anger is the emotion, that fight defense that helps us to feel affronted or irritated by something. Let's say you meet a friend and they're late every time they meet you, and they're late for half an hour or something like that. And then you might be scared of conflict, so you don't bring up the issue. You just think, oh, it's fine, they're busy, and there's going to be low self-esteem in there as well, like, oh, it doesn't matter if they don't turn up to meet me. And then we're not going to set that boundary, which would be, can you please be on time to meet me? That annoyance, that anger is what helps us to be able to set that boundary. Paranoia. when we've come from a narcissistic family, that narcissistic parent betrays our confidences, is untrustworthy. There's lots of subtext to any conversation. There are hidden meanings. There's lots of plausible deniability. It's a really tricky relationship to be in. So we're going to have paranoid ways of thinking. I have a video on this as well. Dog whistling. There's a video by a YouTuber called Meredith Miller. She had a narcissistic parent and she talks about dog whistling. So this is when it's related to that subtext in conversations. So nothing can really be taken at face value. Everything is always about something else, usually about something else. And a parent can be saying something and there's subtext to it, and the child can be hearing it and understanding the subtext, whereas the people around are most likely not going to understand what the subtext is to that. So then the child or the adult child is going to react because they know what's actually being said in that situation. So, normally it's going to be some kind of criticism, put down, but where there's generally some kind of plausible deniability around it. Or if they would be challenged on it by anyone, they would say, "Oh, I didn't mean that. You're oversensitive, you're exaggerating," etc., that kind of thing. So that's useful to know. So it's also called reactive abuse when that parent pushes and pushes and pushes the child because they're looking for that angry reaction. And I'll put a link in the description to Meredith Miller's video on dog whistling. Damned if you do and damned if you don't. I'll also put a link to a video which is called Damned If You Do and Damned If You Don't. These are situations set up in narcissistic households where whatever you do, whichever choice you make, is going to be wrong in some way. So this is part of that disorganized attachment. So there's no stable environment. The rules aren't solid. The rules change all of the time. Addictions. If you come from a narcissistic family, it's more than likely you're going to have some kind of addictive behavior. So addictions can take many forms: drugs, alcohol, social media, watching TV, shopping, addictions to relationships. It can take many forms. And what addictions help us to do are to calm down our nervous system, regulate ourselves, stabilize ourselves, manage our inner world. Issues around food. So many people are going to have some kind of eating disorder, maybe more in the teenage years than in the adult years. But anorexia, bulimia, overeating, there's a difficult relationship with food. This can be for many reasons. I have a video on that, and there's an article on my website as well. And linked in with that, most people seem to have some kind of body dysmorphic disorder. So they're on the spectrum somehow. There's a real hatred for what they look like physically, hatred for their body. Some people can't look at themselves in the mirror. Many reasons for this as well. Hypercritical parents, feeling humiliated about the body, especially when people go through their teenage years. That tends to be when there are more attacks and more shaming. And also, I think it's a focal point for our self-loathing. So if we loathe our bodies, for example, or the way that we look, then it's something that we might feel we can change. Whereas that self-loathing for our own soul or for our own character can feel really hard to tolerate, and we might try to bury those feelings, or it gets channeled into feelings about our bodies. The fear of abandonment. If we've come from a narcissistic family, we're absolutely going to have a fear of abandonment. So this isn't related to if your parent left you or not, or anything like that. It's to do with that emotional neglect. So when we have a narcissistic parent, they don't have an interest in who the child is. They're shaping the child into what they want the child to be. So that in itself is going to be traumatic for the child, to have that constant messaging that you're not good enough and you need to be what I want you to be. If a child doesn't do what the narcissistic parent wants them to do, if they don't be how the narcissistic parent wants them to be, then they get shouted at, they get criticised, they get silent treatment for days. So this is hard enough to tolerate as an adult. So as a 2, 3, 4, 5 and onwards year-old child, how is that going to sit with the child that their parent doesn't speak to them for hours or days, and their parent is raging for hours or days? It's going to be really hard for a child to manage. So that emotional neglect in itself and the behaviours of the parent when the child isn't what the parent wants them to be is the root of that fear of abandonment. So a biological fear of abandonment is going to be kind of programmed into our DNA, isn't it? And then we're going to have that real feeling that we're going to be abandoned if we don't do what's expected of us, because we're growing up in an abusive household. So it makes that really intense. The fear of intimacy. Fear of intimacy is that fear of being close to people because we know how they can hurt us. We can feel as well like we're going to be engulfed, taken over, controlled, be it someone else's mercy. And because we struggle to set boundaries, or we don't know what boundaries are, then this makes relationships really hard to manage, and people being close to us really hard to manage. So this, again, is all tied in with the issues with relationships and the window of tolerance and being triggered and not being able to set boundaries, and also that fear of abandonment and our attachment style. So all of this stuff creates a big picture. People pleasing. We're probably going to be a chronic people pleaser if we've come out of this kind of family. And I have a YouTube video on that and an article on that on my website as well. And I'll put links to those in the description. Harsh inner critic. Many people have a harsh inner critic. Some people hear an audible voice in their mind. Some people don't. 4% of the general population hear audible voices. And for people that have been traumatized, this percentage is going to be higher. I don't know what the actual percentage is. So that inner critic that kind of keeps us in line, that really harsh drill sergeant, like we're living in a boot camp in our own mind. Many reasons for why that's there. I also have a video on the harsh inner critic. Guilt. So I have a video on this also. Guilt is going to be something that we're programmed with or we develop in our really early years. So as part of that, not being allowed to be ourselves, assertive and independent, and being shaped into what the narcissist wants us to be, we have this false guilt that develops. So we're actually feeling guilty when we're not doing anything wrong, but we feel like we're doing something wrong, and that keeps us in that people-pleasing role. So there's a real guilt when we've actually done something wrong that's hurt someone, and then we have that false guilt when we're not doing anything wrong at all, but we just have that feeling that helps nudge us back into being people-pleasing and in our adapted self. What's our adapted self? So when we've come from a background like this, we're going to have a system of coping mechanisms, which is what that triggers and triggering is. So a system of triggered states that we go into, and that's an adapted self. And our real self, our authentic self, we're still that somehow. It's not as if we become a completely different person when we recover from trauma. We're still fundamentally the same person, but there's lots of ways that we're not. So we would like to actually set boundaries. We don't take being treated badly anymore. So there's a false guilt, which is part of our coping mechanisms. So lots of people feel really crippled by this, and we can feel it as strongly as when we were 5 years old in our adult life. Shame. Many people have crippling shame in their adult years. So we're not born with this, are we? This is something that develops out of coming from a dysfunctional childhood. This can also be seen as a coping mechanism. I have a video and article on my website about shame as well. Fear of the self. So that authentic self that I just mentioned, we can have a fear of that. So lots of people feel deep down, they're a monster, or if people really knew me, they're going to reject me, or what's really down there? Who am I really? And then a fear of perhaps it being confirmed somehow, I am this awful person. So I have an article on my website on that. I'm not sure if I have a video. I think I might do. So that's fear of the self. Loneliness. Many people have a real deep sense of being alone in the world. This can come from not having a family, so there's no safety net to fall back on. This can come from something called self-alienation. So this is when we're alienated from ourselves. So we don't know ourselves very well. We have a compartmentalized self because we have these coping mechanisms that come up when they're needed. And these are all parts of us that are separated off from ourselves. So ideally, it would all be integrated and working together. But when we have this kind of background, then we're going to have to develop ways of coping. And that means that we have different parts of our consciousness and they serve different functions. So again, it's coming back to those coping mechanisms of fight, flight, freeze, submit, and attach. And then also we're going to have things that we don't want to remember, parts of ourselves that we want to disconnect from, like parts that need to be loved when we feel like we will never be loved, we can't get that need met. And, maybe we have a belief around that we're so unlovable, we would never be loved. So we try to suppress those needs in ourselves in early childhood. They stay suppressed as part of our unresolved trauma that we're carrying when we've come from this kind of background. Avoidance. So we're going to be avoidant. So I have a video on this as well and an article on my website. What are we avoidant of? We might be avoidant of social situations. We might be avoidant of people. We might be avoidant of getting married. We might walk down the back streets so we don't have to see other people rather than walk in busy streets. We might like to be around one or two people instead of big groups. So what are we avoidant of? We're avoidant of our triggers, actually. So we're trying to live our life in such a way that we don't get triggered and we don't get hurt. So we can often end up living quite a narrow life. So we can avoid things in the physical world, and then we can also avoid things in our own mind. So we're going to be avoidant of our inner world, and we're going to be avoidant of stuff that triggers us in the outside world as well, so that we don't feel like we're going to fall apart or be overwhelmed, or feel out of control, all of those things. Self-compassion, or rather lack of it. This is related to our harsh inner critic. So we can't let self-compassion come in, and the harsh inner critic helps to keep that down. How does this help us? Because it doesn't superficially make sense, does it? Why we'd have such a harsh inner world. So if we have lots of self-compassion, then there are things that we're not going to put up with. We're not going to put up with being treated badly. We're going to want more for ourselves and more for our lives. We probably wouldn't be able to have those addictions. We wouldn't be able to drink a bottle of wine every night, or take drugs each day, or be on TikTok for 4 hours, because those behaviors aren't good for us. They don't feel nice, actually. And the more that we get in touch with our feelings and how our body feels, the more that those things feel off. But when we're calming ourselves down, when we're in a place we don't like ourselves very much, when we're regulating our nervous system and our psyche, then self-compassion is going to interfere with that. It's going to interfere with our addictions, and feeling bad feels normal. So we don't even realize that we feel bad, because it's unlikely that we look after ourselves very well when we're unrecovered from trauma. So we're going to have addictions. We probably don't eat well. We might not sleep well. We probably work too hard. We might not go to the doctor. We might not go to the dentist. There are lots of ways in which we don't take care of ourselves physically and emotionally. And having self-compassion would interfere with how we cope with life. And also we're going to have deep down beliefs of, it was my fault anyway, I'm to blame, I'm exaggerating, I'm making it up. There are all kinds of ways that we think, lots of thinking patterns that we have that all confuse those things as well. So, if you're an evil person who's deep down a monster, why are you going to have self-compassion? You're not. You're going to think, I'm a monster. So our core beliefs are going to influence all of these things. And a core belief, we can think of it as a belief we've developed. Then we're going to have emotional content around it. So let's say we have a core belief of, I am unlovable. So this is something we deeply believe to be true, and we've believed it for so long that we don't question it. So we might be aware of that belief or we might not be. So we have a feeling of I'm unlovable. What does that feel like? It probably feels quite ugly and quite shameful. So then that core belief exists in that feeling, and then that feeling is a driver to our behaviors. So I'm unlovable. It feels quite shameful. I feel bad about myself. And then I feel like other people are better than me. And then I think I should do what they want me to do. And then I might feel like I'm going to be lovable. So that's what happens at a basic level. So self-compassion is going to interfere with those things as well. So this is why that's a thing that tends to come quite late down the road when we're processing and coming to understand the effects it's had on us when we come from a background like that. Perfectionism. You're most likely going to be a perfectionist, so you'll hold yourself to a really high standard, and whenever you achieve something that used to fit in with your picture of what it would mean to be perfect, maybe, or to have achieved something, then the bar gets raised higher, and you think, well, if I've achieved that, it can't be that difficult. It must be easy, and the bar gets raised again. Other reasons for perfectionism are wanting to be self-reliant, so not wanting to ask other people for help. So I need to be able to do all these things myself. And also, of course, because of having a highly critical, narcissistic parent, there's a need to be perfect at things so that there won't be judgment or criticism. High achieving. So some people from narcissistic families don't work. Some people from narcissistic families are really high achieving. And then, of course, everything else in between. So coming from this kind of background isn't a bar to achieving a lot. Procrastination. Lots of people procrastinate a lot. Why is this? Some reasons for that are fear of judgment and fear of criticism. So if we think of an example of somebody works from home, they have that underlying core belief, I'm not good enough, that fear of I'm going to be criticized, fear of going to be judged. And then we're going to maybe procrastinate about doing our work. So find ourselves busy doing lots of other things. And this is going on subconsciously. And then we might find that we're coming towards the end of the day, and then we start to feel that pressure from the other part of us that worries about we're going to get fired and we need to get our work done. So then the driver for the behavior changes. So first of all, avoiding work, and then we're doing the work because our fear of what's going to happen if we don't do it is greater than our fear of what's going to happen if we do it, which is that fear of criticism and judgment. So really interesting to think about procrastination. What's the driver for my behavior? And then we can have an inner conflict as well. So two parts of us arguing inside ourselves, basically. And then this can lead to procrastination. And linked in with this as well is finding it hard to make a decision. So lots of people have struggles with making decisions, and this is also all kind of tied in with the same thing. You probably call yourself lazy. So lots of people have an idea, a core belief that they're lazy, even though they're probably really active and doing a lot all of the time. So good to notice that and then challenge it. So thinking you're lazy and then looking at what you actually do. Are you lazy? Probably not. We doubt our perceptions of reality. When we've grown up with a narcissistic parent, we're often told that our version of events is incorrect. What we think they said they didn't say. We're told that we said something that we didn't say. We're told that we meant something that we didn't mean. And this is really confusing to grow up in that kind of environment, having our perceptions challenged all the time or told that they're wrong all of the time. So we're going to often fall into that pattern of thinking of, am I making this up? Am I really seeing things properly? How much can I trust my perception of events? And often we defer to other people as an authority because we don't trust our own views. Assertive communication. So this is tied in with that inability to set boundaries and not being able to be direct about what we think because we're driven by that fear of conflict. So if we think of that in terms of core beliefs, we have a core belief of I'm going to be rejected. We're fearful of conflict because we expect to be left. So we don't have an assertive way of communicating a lot of the time. So if we know what our feelings are, we don't feel like we can say them. Emptiness. We're often going to have a sensation, a feeling of emptiness. So some people feel it in their upper chest, some people feel it in their stomach, and some people feel it like a dark, thick emptiness even. For everyone, it's going to be different perception. And when we've recovered from the trauma, when we've processed all the stuff that we're still carrying, is when we can not feel that feeling of emptiness anymore, which can be really uncomfortable, really painful. Cognitive errors. So we're going to have some ways of thinking that are trauma ways of thinking rather than realistic ways of thinking. So, for example, we're going to have black and white thinking. This is when the good and the bad are kind of separated out in our minds, and we might see people as all good or all bad. We find it hard to marry those complex ideas together. And this is because of an important developmental stage that wasn't able to happen in early childhood. So we have this mind where those kind of things are separated out. So we're going to have all kinds of quirks in our thinking patterns that are going to stop us from seeing things how they really are. So we're seeing things from our trauma bias, actually. So I'll put a list of those different cognitive errors we can make in the description as well, because that's really interesting to look into. So we can challenge those thoughts, those dysfunctional thoughts. And one thing we can do to manage that is when we have a feeling or a thought or an idea, we think, is this a fact? Is it an opinion? Is it an emotion? So we're separating out. This is all about core beliefs as well. What comes from a core belief I have? I am unlovable. Why is that true? I'm not good enough. Why is that true? And ways we can know if we're in an unhealthy thinking style are if we think with the language of always, never, this day's ruined, it's been destroyed, those extreme ways of speaking and thinking. But when we've grown up with this, then it's going to feel second nature to us, and it doesn't feel extreme. It just feels normal. So it's kind of dissecting our thoughts, actually, so that we can dissect our beliefs that exist underneath those thoughts, because all of these thoughts and emotions that we have and opinions come out of our core beliefs. And they also come out of our values as people. And part of that black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking as well, is that devaluing and idealization. So we might idealize our romantic partner and then devalue ourselves. So I'm not worthy of them. I don't know why they stay with me. They're going to cheat on me soon because I'm not good enough. I'm a piece of whatever. So these are all things it's really important to be aware of. So we can start to deconstruct ourselves, deprogram ourselves from what we've come from. It's like leaving a cult, isn't it? When we come out of this kind of family, it's the cult of the narcissistic parent. They're the influence over the whole family. People have to go along with their way of thinking. It's my way or the highway. If we don't go along with them, then there's serious punishment, and shunning and abandonment are there at the end of the road, really, if you don't go along with how they want things to be done. So we're going to have a head full of things that aren't true. So it might be small things that are not really that important, like many people think, oh, I come from a really special family, or we're different, or we're wealthy, or we're something that other people aren't. And these are those narcissistic beliefs that the parents have that maybe get soaked in and become part of our belief system. So things like that, but then also the really important stuff, which is things like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I have no value, I'm a monster, all these kinds of core beliefs that we're going to carry when we've come from a background like this also need to be looked at, and we need to deprogram ourselves from that stuff. then rebuild ourselves with realistic beliefs, realistic opinions, so that we're not living a life from that trauma bias. Low self-esteem. You're probably going to have low self-esteem and low self-worth. Social anxiety. I think the statistics are something around 8%, 10% of the population have social anxiety. With people from trauma, this is going to be higher. I don't have a figure for that, but you're probably going to have issues around that. Panic. You might find yourself panicking a lot about a lot of things. That's normal. That's part of our freeze defense, actually. Depression. Many people are going to have periods of depression or long life depression coming from this kind of background. Lots of people are going to have suicidal thoughts, passive suicidal thoughts. I can't go on. I don't want to go on. I wish I didn't have to wake up tomorrow morning, that kind of thing. Some people are going to make suicide attempts. So this is an outcome of coming from this kind of childhood. Burnout. We can be susceptible to burnout because people tend to push themselves really hard. So let's say somebody that works a lot, they're maybe going to work 50, 60 hours a week, if not more, and push themselves really hard in many ways. They might not take much downtime except for maybe a couple of drinks in the evening or an hour on TikTok or something like that, as a mental switch off from ourselves, but it's not really downtime as it would be in the ideal. So we can end up really pushing ourselves too hard and too far and then get burnt out. Phobias and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Lots of people have some elements of that. Health anxiety. Lots of people have health anxiety. So they get really stressed when they feel an ache or a pain. And of course, trauma plays out in the body. So we're going to feel pains and whatnot. Derealization and depersonalization. So these are feelings of ourselves not being real, the world not being real, feeling like we live in a book or we live in a movie. You hate your birthday and you hate Christmas or whatever religious holiday you have in what country you're from. It can be really difficult to be able to celebrate any of the holidays because they've been surrounded by horrible stuff when you've been a child. So for some children, that day is when they're ignored again, so they don't feel special, which you're supposed to feel on your birthday. And for some children with more malignant parents, the parent uses this as an opportunity to be even more abusive because they're malignant. So birthdays horrible, Christmas horrible, holidays in general horrible. Issues with trust. So some people are going to find that they feel like they can't trust anyone. And this takes a lot of time to work through. And you might always have a little bit of your brain that's saying don't trust anyone. So those defenses maybe never really relaxing 100%, but you can get to a place where they're very relaxed. And missing memories. So lots of people have missing memories. Some people have chunks missing out of childhood. Some people don't remember much before the age of 14, 15, 16. This can be seen as kind of a double layer to protecting ourselves from knowing what went on in us. So not only do we not remember the emotions connected with the events that happened, we also don't remember the events that happened themselves. And even for people that do remember the events that happened, there's that emotional disconnect there when we're having this unprocessed trauma. So that means that people can tell a story like it's a funny story, or they don't really feel much, or they feel something really mild, rather than connecting fully with the emotions that were happening at that time that we're still carrying when we have unprocessed trauma and the symptoms of complex PTSD. So to finish here, this isn't a list of everything that's possible when you've come from this kind of background, when you've come from trauma, but it's a lot of them and helps to normalize how we see ourselves. So these things aren't just us or our character. They're coping mechanisms, or they're part of our character that's exaggerated or tweaked to be able to cope. And we're hugely adaptable, aren't we? The human race. So we've found all these ways of coping, and that's how we've coped through our lives. And the same as we learn to do all that stuff, we can learn to do new stuff, and we can be in a much more positive, happy place. So it is possible to recover, and you can, with paying attention to all of this stuff and developing our self-awareness and finding healthier ways to cope, which kind of is born naturally out of doing all of this work. So we start to understand ourselves, our relationship with ourselves changes, we start to like ourselves more, accept ourselves, then our harsh inner critic, dies down. We begin to develop some self-compassion, and then we can get to a place where we know ourselves more. We live in that authentic version of ourselves. We're not chronic people-pleasing anymore. We don't need to be drunk every night. We're in a much happier place in our lives where we're able to reach our potential. So this is a list of almost everything you need to know if you've come from a narcissistic family. So I hope that was useful, and take care of yourselves. Bye.